Coffee with Coach. I was listening to National Public Radio last week, and somebody was saying that the problem in the country today is we're languishing. Well, I can understand that. There's a whole lot of problems going on in the church today. I was reading a Wall Street Journal article that somebody sent me that said churches are dying because the pandemic has caused everyone to stop worshiping in church, and attendance is sliding off, and no one's coming anymore. And this is just an exacerbation of the problem that we had before. And I hear lots of churches complaining about the fights that pastors and boards of trustees are having with the anti-vaxxers and the anti-maskers, and it's a tough time. And churches and pastors are highly discouraged. And I don't hear a lot of hope. And yet, I was thinking about it the other day, and I thought, there are lots of reasons for hope. In fact, I can think of 5 good reasons why we should be hopeful in the midst of all this. I want to talk about that today. Are you ready for some hope? I'm Steve Petty, and I have 3 reasons for these videos to help you become a better pastor and leader, to save you time and money, to help educate, energize, and motivate you to energize and motivate your church. Most of us have heard the dire stories of pastors leaving their churches. There's a lot of despair, disappointment, distrust, financial hardships, personal attacks. It's like a tsunami has struck our churches. And I hear those stories, and I hear the sadness in people's voices as they talk about them. What has happened to the church that we used to know and love? It seems like things will never go back to normal. And then the Omicron virus hit, and the numbers spiked back up, and a lot of churches went back to online worship, no in-person worship. It's been a tough time, and it's probably going to get a little bit worse before it gets a little bit better. But in the midst of that, there's some real signs of hope for our churches, and I want to share those with you today because I think they're really significant, and I think you need to understand them when you're looking forward, because if you understand the signs of hope, you'll move forward with a lot more positivity and energy and grab the moment that this is and make the best of it. So, to be honest, we were in trouble before the pandemic. You think about it, you remember back before the pandemic. Can you remember before the pandemic? Before the pandemic, church attendance had been sliding, and that slide was getting even more precipitous. The political divide in the country didn't help. People were angry. People were upset. People talked about the need to refocus their churches, even in the midst of times when churches were fighting over homosexuality and ordination of women and ordination of gays and all kinds of stuff. There was a lot of difficulty going on in the churches, and many, many people were feeling like their churches were too content and too complacent to really deal with all of the changes that were coming. People wanted a calm and easier time. What they got was a pandemic, a tsunami that just washed all of the old concerns away and drove everybody crazy. But in the midst of that, there are 5 reasons for hope. And I'm going to mention all of these reasons in terms of, first, what was the situation before? And second, what is the situation today? Because in each case, we're better off because of the pandemic. 5 reasons for hope. Reason number 1, we shifted to online. Now think about it. Before the pandemic, a lot of churches were starting to shift to online, but most of the churches were reluctant to do that. It cost money. It was a technology we didn't understand. It was confusing. It would require more volunteers, and we didn't have enough volunteers, and we didn't have enough money. So most churches didn't bother to do anything with online worship. But starting in March of 2020, we had to shut down. And that meant a lot of churches had to scramble like crazy to do online worship. People were doing online worship in their living rooms, on their phones. People were doing online worship outdoors. People were doing online worship in a variety of places, but it caused them to think about how they get online. broadcasting on Facebook or YouTube or on their own websites became a must if you wanted to keep contact with your congregation and move into the future. So what we had been reluctant to do before, we were forced to do by the pandemic. And now we have cameras, we have microphones, we have lights. We've learned how to do this. And moving forward, we can continue to do it. And it will increase your church's outreach to the whole community and the world. If you've got a message, the world is waiting to hear it. Number 2, church attendance has actually increased for most churches. Before the pandemic, worship attendance was dwindling. For 95% of the churches in the country, worship was down in 2020 over where it had been in 2019 and 18 and 17. Worship attendance was pretty bad. When we went online, we thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be terrible. Only 2 or 3 people are going to watch. But most churches found within a month or so, their worship attendance online was actually higher than their worship attendance was before in person. More people were watching. Now, they might not have been watching the whole thing. Maybe they just watched the announcements. Maybe they just fast forwarded to the sermon. But because it was online and it was available 7 days a week, you didn't have to just watch on Sunday mornings. More people could watch. Most churches found that about 50% of their people would connect online Sunday, sometime Sunday. Maybe less than 30% at the old worship hour of Sunday morning. But by Sunday evening, about 50% have checked in and watched the worship service. By Wednesday and Thursday, another 50% had come in, and by Friday and Saturday and the weekend following, worship attendance has actually gone over 100% of what it was before the pandemic. Some churches saw worship attendance increase as much as 200%. Now, how do we leverage that going forward? We've built a congregation of people around the country, around the world, who are watching our worship service. Do we just abandon that and go back to worship only in church? I don't think so. If we're smart, we continue doing what we were doing before. We continue with online worship in a variety of forms. And when we go back to live worship at home, we don't abandon the online. Church attendance increased. Let's keep that increase. Third, small groups have actually grown. Now, maybe your church didn't do this, but in many churches, when they shifted to online worship, they also shifted to online groups. So your Bible studies, your small groups that had been meeting before, study groups, task forces, could continue to meet, only they met online. In many cases, they saw the attendance at online meetings actually increase. Before, well, if you forgot about it or you got there late or you were running late, you might just choose not to attend. But with online worship, you had to make a point to get there at the beginning, but you knew it was going to last for an hour and you could log off. You didn't have to spend a half an hour in the parking lot afterwards arguing with somebody. You didn't have to drive there and fight traffic or weather. You just turned on your computer or your phone or however you Zoomed and you got online and you watched people and you had a good meeting. Meetings were better. Conversation had better quality. Online meetings are great. And going forward, if we're smart, we'll continue to do maybe half of our meetings online. And think about it. Which meetings do you have to have in person? And which meetings are maybe better online? Fourth, we pivoted to electronic giving. Before the pandemic, many churches talked about doing electronic giving, but few had. Those that had moved to giving by credit card or automatic check deposits, saw that their giving increased and it leveled out. Whereas before we had electronic giving, there would be really high peaks as we got to Easter and Thanksgiving and Christmas. We would see attendance increase and we would also giving increase because the only way to give was in person at church. So as in-person worship went up in those holiday seasons, well, giving went up too. But churches that shifted to electronic giving found that a lot of people just set it up so that it paid automatically every month, like all of their other bills. And giving kind of began to level out. And for many churches, it almost got flat. You can still have special offerings at Thanksgiving and Christmas and Easter, and those will boost, but by and large, churches that went to electronic giving found that their giving flattened out, and many churches during the pandemic saw an increase in giving so that their finances actually improved during the pandemic. Oh, you can improve your finances with electronic giving. So, will you continue to do that after the pandemic? Of course you will. So the pandemic has actually improved our church's finances and our ability to collect finances considerably. That's a reason for hope. And lastly, think about this now. Number 1 through 4 have just taught us number 5. We discovered our churches can change. Before the pandemic, one of the most common complaints I heard from churches was, well, our church just doesn't want to change. Our people like it the way it is. There's a great deal of contentment in the church. So changing is just not going to happen. My people won't change. They're too conservative. They're too old. They're all in their 70s and 80s. They're not going to change. Well, the pandemic forced us to change, which means we discovered something. We can change. Our people learned to pivot. Our people learned to go to online worship. Our people learned to attend small groups online. Our people learned to do electronic giving online. We learned we can change. Can we go back to the old ways? Well, some of them we might want to go back to. Are we going to rely on passing the plate on Sunday mornings for our giving? Well, we're probably going to continue to pass the plate, but we're going to continue to do online giving as well. So what have we learned? We learned we can change. That's huge. Churches and pastors that thought they couldn't change before, let's realize we just changed. Dynamically, dramatically, we changed. We can change coming out of this going forward. In fact, coming out of this and moving forward, I think churches will be excited to see changes going forward because they've shifted a lot already. They'll tell you, well, we need to go back to the way it was, but they really don't want to. They really kind of enjoy some of the things we've learned in the midst of the pandemic. And we will enjoy doing them in the future. Bottom line, there are big reasons for hope. Look at all 5 of those and think about them. You've done them. Your church has shifted. And coming out of the pandemic, we should be optimistic. We should be excited. We should dream bigger. We should reach farther. We should believe in God's care and guidance, which has got us through this pandemic so far, and will undoubtedly move with us as we move into the future. Exciting times are ahead, people. Be hopeful. I don't believe churches are dying. I believe the pandemic has actually strengthened us, and we are just tuning up for the next race. Stand back. Here we come. So, that's it for today. If you find these videos helpful, I do hope you will subscribe to my channel, and if you have questions or comments, please consider adding them below or email me at steve@revstevep.com. Next week, I'm going to be talking about evaluating your online worship event. Have you done that? Have you thought about it? I'll give you some guidelines for how to evaluate your worship event online. And keep a lookout for my upcoming podcast. I hope to get that online pretty soon. It will come to a hosting site near you. I'm thinking of calling it The Caffeinated Pulpit, because I discovered there are a number of podcasts called Coffee with Coach. Maybe it'll still be Coffee with Coach. Maybe it'll be The Caffeinated Pulpit. What do you think? Got any better ideas for me? Let me know. You can email me, comment, and I'll see you next week. That's it for Coffee with Coach.